So here we are in peak fall foliage season in western Pennsylvania and the Northeast. I hope that you can enjoy some of that. This is the Far Middle. I am Nick DeOlius. We are at episode 73. Dedication 473 goes to who many consider to be the greatest offensive lineman in the history of the NFL. He was a 73 from the mid-1970s through the mid-1980s, and his name is John Hannah. Now, John Hannah's dad played in the NFL. He was also an offensive lineman. John Hannah was an accomplished wrestler, and he won an individual national championship when he was at prep school. So he was a multi-talented athlete. Played college football at Alabama for the great Bear Bryant. Bear Bryant said that Hannah was the best offensive lineman he had ever had. And, of course, Hannah is in the College Football Hall of Fame. He was a first-round draft pick, 4th overall in that draft by the Patriots in 1973. Now, for those of you who lived during an era where all you know about the Patriots is Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and their dominance, the Patriots, I'm here to tell you, used to be a team that didn't enjoy many major successes to speak of. In the 1970s and the 1980s, they made it to one Super Bowl. They basically got pummeled by the famous Bears team that year. And by the way, Super Bowl 20, that was John Hannah's last game as a pro, so he retired after that game. But the one thing you always knew about those Patriots in the late 70s and early 80s was that John Hannah was going to be sitting there at guard, and they would have a great offensive line. The Patriots held records for rushing yards in the season in 1978. That's when they set it. And they didn't even have a runner that year hit the 1,000-yard mark. So think about that. They set the record for overall rushing yards for a team in a year, and they didn't even have a 1,000-yard rusher. It just shows you how dominant in some ways that line was, because multiple players were basically breaching the 500-yard mark across the backfield, and I think including the quarterback that year with Steve Grogan. And that record fell decades later, so it's not the record today. I think the Ravens hold the record today. But another one of a record that is that I'm speaking of that the Patriots in 78 set was for rushing first downs, and I think that record still sits there today. So that offensive line made a huge difference, and the team set some records in 78, one of which is still standing today. Now, John Hannah, he's in Canton, of course, first Patriot to have a bust there, not the last for sure. And he is an all-century NFL team member. And by the way, Hannah made it to 2 all-decade teams. He made it to the 1970s all-decade team and the 1980s. So that's a bit of a rarity as well. When you ask the football experts out there who was the greatest offensive lineman of them all, many of them might answer Anthony Munoz, but you're going to hear a lot of answers that say John Hannah, and rightfully so. Episode 73, dedication goes to John Hannah. Let's get rolling with connections in honor of Dr. James Burke and his BBC series Connections. Now, John Hannah, as a great offensive lineman, would always look to plug gaps in protection so the offense could function. And he would also work with running backs to make the offense hum. A running back that would have loved to have played with Hannah, who also has a bust in Canton, is Jerome Bettis, a.k.a. the Bus. So let's take the combo of plugging gaps and Jerome Bettis to talk about a recent experience I was fortunate enough to participate in that the constant listeners out there might enjoy hearing about. So a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to participate in a press conference. Now, many of you by now know I'm not a big fan of things like press conferences, being the introvert that I am. But this one held my interest and willingness to show up for special reasons. And those special reasons go back to how we at CNX, the company that I work for, we view community investment opportunities. So right off the bat, I should say that we don't view community investment efforts as giving or charity, those terms that you typically hear. We view them instead as rate of return opportunities that bolster the value of our community at large and our company. And we look for 3 traits or characteristics when assessing community investment opportunity at CNX. First thing we look for is we want this opportunity, this investment, to be tangible. In other words, if we made the investment with a specific project, can we measure the results? It's not a touchy-feely thing, but something that's tangible. We also want the investment to be impactful. So we think of impactful as bang for the buck. We want our investment to move the needle, which means you'll want to seek out opportunity that many in the corporate world or in the nonprofit world or with institutions, they often look past. So targeting people or efforts that are largely ignored or, again, falling through the cracks with that theme. And then last but not least, we want the investment when it comes to community to be local. So this one's pretty simple in that we want to invest in efforts that geographically sit on top of our company's footprint, where our employees live and work, where our operations are, those types of things. So Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio, the state of West Virginia, Western Virginia, that's where our eyes are always going to be scanning to see what we might get involved with. So if you take this tangible and impactful and local approach to investing, not giving or charity, right, investing in communities, what does it lead to? Well, for one, opportunity and projects that are in great need of attention and resources, which usually equates to really challenging issues and efforts. Basically, success is far from guaranteed if we do this the right way with our targeting. And failure, frankly, it's almost a certainty at some point in the journey. That's the point if you really want to stick to tangible, impactful, and local. And failure, it can stink, right? It can be frustrating, but it makes the successes and the victories all the sweeter. And my experience has been that when we stick to the tangible and the impactful and the local, even if we don't achieve the desired ultimate outcome, we manage in the end to make some major advancements and improvements in the status quo. And this is coming from a guy, constant listeners, that is impatient as it gets. And taking this approach, it also leads you to partnering with groups or people who the system and the bigger money largely ignores. It creates a differentiated approach, and that's really rewarding and at the same time very challenging. Okay, so now back to the specifics of this press conference. It was in Pittsburgh at the Northview Heights Public Housing Plan, and it was to announce the rolling out, pun intended, of a cyber bus that CNX helped to fund with our investment into the Jerome Bettis, the Bus Stops Here Foundation. So the cyber bus is sort of what it sounds like. It's a bus that's equipped with IT infrastructure to roam a region to allow a spectrum of students and also their parents and seniors, by the way, when the students are in school during the daytime, to be able to access the technology and beef up their STEM skills and develop all kinds of other skill sets and get things accomplished. If you go back to those prior themes I mentioned when it comes to our community investments, you'll see that the cyber bus, it checks all those boxes. Is it tangible? Yeah, for sure. You can measure its impact and its rate of return from the STEM scores that students would sort of appreciate with respect to, as well as usage rates with the cyber bus itself. Is it impactful? Yep, check. This asset will be setting career paths for students. Is it local? Yes, and the beauty of it is how it roams and travels quite well, obviously. It's a bus, so that it spreads a wide net, sort of a pun when it comes to the internet, and can serve as a feeder for all kinds of downstream or subsequent educational progressions of students. So it checks all the boxes. And the cyber bus, it fills those gaps that I spoke about. The current education system in Western Pennsylvania and in Pittsburgh, like most other places, or maybe too many other places, it's falling short when it comes to math and science competencies and proficiencies of students, and that's hurting my region and my home. But for CNX and the Bettis Foundation and other willing participants that participated in the cyber bus, the asset that is the cyber bus, it wouldn't get done. And the cracks don't get sealed, and then countless students and future potentials are falling through those cracks. And let me plug here, while I've got the chance, the leadership of our host for this event, which was the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh. So let's start at the top with the Executive Director, Mr. Castor Binion. This was the first time I met Castor, and right at the start, you could tell he knew how to command a situation. He was asking all kinds of questions to the technical staff about the cyber bus before the event started, and he was immediately shifting to the next moves and add-ons to make the cyber bus even more accessible. It's pretty impressive to watch him in action. Well, it turns out that Mr. Binion, he knows a thing or two about leadership, because talking to him, I found out that day that he served both in the 82nd and the 101st Airborne Divisions before jumping over. There's another pun for you with paratroopers, jumping over to a different form of public service that he's now leading. And then there was also Miss Michelle Sandage, who is the Chief Community Affairs Officer over at the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh. So she basically served as the MC for the event, and as the planner, she's the one to put all this together. Great personality, but the thing that impressed me the most is you could tell, or at least my engineering OCD mind could tell, that she prepped well in planning for this event. She had all kinds of little factoids and comments that she would drop at key spots on the podium or in the conversations. Her attention to detail paid off, and it's a type of thing that most might take for granted or not even notice. But it's something I really appreciate and was really impressed with. So look, all of you know that I have been and I am a critic of government intervention into things that the private sector could solve quicker or do better, like housing. Often government policies and intervention, they make housing less affordable and more scarce. But the problem is not the people running the day-to-day on the ground at these institutions like the Housing Authority of the city of Pittsburgh. They are about as good as it gets when it comes to public service. So hats off to them. Let's find ways to turn them loose with the tools they need instead of hemming them in. The cyber bus will allow them to do just that. So the event was awesome. It was fun. Jerome was there along with those awesome leaders from the Housing Authority that I mentioned for the city of Pittsburgh. And this brings me to the next topic to connect to. And it's on that often spoken about but seldom truly realized theme of partnerships. Doesn't it seem like everyone these days are speaking of partnerships everywhere you look? But too seldom the talk doesn't realize the reality of a true partnership. And I think at CNX we're fortunate enough to achieve that with individuals or entities like Jerome Bettis and his different efforts and businesses. And I wanted to summarize how we got there in the hope that it might help you and others develop great partnerships, because those things matter greatly. The relationship between ourselves and Bettis Brothers Industries, which is the company that Jerome and his brother John run, they began as a business relationship. We both work in domestic energy in that space, and the relationship started up a few years back, and it kicked off strong and continues to go well. And before it wasn't long that we realized that we shared other interests beyond the direct business relationship, which dealt with those community investments that I've been speaking about. And Jerome and John Bettis, they both shared their own version of that tangible, impactful local that I described and that we used. And both of us took special interest in education. That's something that Jerome and John Bettis are very passionate about. So that led to the first community investment that we made about 2 years ago in a Pittsburgh area high school, Stowe Rocks High School, that is in one of those underserved zip codes that we always target on the urban and rural side. And we provided iPads to the students at that event. It was a great event, but it got CNX and myself thinking about bigger things and some what ifs, so to speak. What if we created a CNX foundation? And what if then we directed investment into that tangible, impactful local screening approach? And we funded the startup of a mentorship academy. Yeah, the same mentorship academy that I talked about in a recent Far Middle podcast. So it's not unreasonable to say that a business relationship with Bettis Brothers led to a community investment at a too often ignored high school that led to the concept of the CNX Foundation Mentorship Academy, which in its second year now and is a huge success. But then everything went full circle as myself and CNX found ourselves back yet again with the Bettis Bus Stops Here Foundation with the Cyber Bus event a couple weeks ago. So it keeps feeding itself. In the lessons, for me, partnerships, when meaningful and done right, they matter big time. One great effort, one great investment or idea, it's going to lead to another invariably. When you have strong partners, you're more confident to take bigger risks, which means you stand to realize a bigger payoff. And the last lesson, you sometimes catch yourself cold when you think about how things would have turned out if you never pursued the partnership to begin with. Quite differently and with big missed or foregone opportunities. So that gets you thinking. And this experience that I just laid out with Bettis Brothers, it's the same progression and themes of our other great partnerships. They start with a fundamentally aligned business proposition, and then they evolve and grow into all kinds of different offshoots and opportunity. And at CNX, we enjoy similar strong partnerships with companies like Deepwell and Evolution in the natural gas domestic energy space, to regional community colleges that we also work really closely with that are actually providing students rate of return for the tuition that they charge. So these are institutions like Community College of Allegheny County and Community College of Beaver County, great outfits. Companies like New Light that are out there in California that are transforming the consumer goods space by offering up a biodegradable plastic substitute that's better than the original. So check out New Light Technologies when you get a chance. And entities like the Greater Pittsburgh International Airport, where we're building a literal energy ecosystem that's going to transform aviation and a host of other industries in really good ways. These are the types of partnerships that will motivate you and will motivate a team. And what does the future hold? In these days, it's often impossible to predict the future, but for CNX and for myself, I would dare to predict that it's going to hold more partnerships. Now, all this discussion on business and one thing leading to another, when it comes to partnerships, it got me thinking. Let's talk about what's going on in the energy space these days here in the United States when it comes to the bedrock of our economy, which is natural gas. The past 20 years or so in the domestic natural gas industry have completely changed the world, and all of it for the better. Partnerships, they played a crucial role in that journey, and I think they're going to continue to do so. So, you got an innovator who's out there tinkering with horizontal drilling one day. They're doing that over here. And then another entrepreneur is performing some trial and error to figure out completions technology. It's going on over there. They partner up, and along comes the shale revolution. That leads to partnerships with mineral rights owners. And in the case of my corner of the world, that means family farms and everyday people who own those mineral rights, where a new partnership in the form of leases and royalty agreements, they start to take shape. That creates wealth for scores of stakeholders as the wells get drilled. So millions of dollars invested, soon that's growing into the need for billions of dollars to be invested, and thus partnerships with finance firms blossom. Capital becomes one of the lubricants that makes the new energy machine really start to hum at a level of performance that's going to move that needle. Then all that supply and that depth of inventory in our domestic natural gas basins, it leads to more partnerships where midstream companies start to construct new pipelines to transport the natural gas from the basin where it's extracted from to the demand centers that are clamoring for it, where utilities start building power plants to utilize the natural gas to provide cheap and reliable power, where manufacturing comes back to onshore, with an example regionally here being the Shell petrochemical or cracker facility outside of Pittsburgh. And all of this capital investment in the wells and the pipes and the power plants and the chemical facilities, it leads to, guess what? To jobs, ones that pay family-sustaining wages and grow the middle class. That's been a much-needed boost to places like Appalachia, which leads to partnerships with entities like those community colleges that I mentioned. And that sort of takes me right into the next connection, because all these partnerships in the natural gas space and affiliated industries, they start to grow and extend from a regional level to the national level to the global level. That's why today most people don't realize this, but the national supply or daily production in the country of natural gas, it's exceeded what it was prior to pandemic. And it's sitting at an all-time high. We've become so good at providing low-cost and reliable natural gas that more partnerships have blossomed globally to the point where today natural gas is one of this country's largest and absolutely most impactful exports. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, those exports have grown steadily to Asia, and now Europe is actually importing more U.S. LNG by the day to displace, of course, Russian natural gas and to loosen Putin's grip. Domestic natural gas production at an all-time high and growing. What's that do? That drops inflation here, it fights Russia over there, and it drops carbon dioxide everywhere. Think how much better we would be if government and environmentalists would stop attacking the natural gas industry and start supporting the doers that drive the real economy. I wrote a commentary on this a while back that's titled The Premeditated Murder of the Greatest Story Never Told. Give it a read on nickdelius.com. It's under the Topics tab under commentary and energy. I think you'll find it truer than ever today. In a partnership of makers and doers banding together, it can often overcome and resist attack from those appropriators and those takers for quite a while, but not forever, of course, which means the sooner that we wake up and apply rational thought to things like energy policy, hey, the better. And this brings us right into our next thought to connect to, and it's one of our most often discussed topics, which is ESG, or environmental social governance investing. There is a new study out there by two authors, one from UCLA and one from NYU. The authors' names are Cornell and Damodaran. Damodaran is Damodaran. Check that study out. But the study concluded with an interesting statement. It said, telling firms that being socially responsible will deliver higher growth profits and value is false advertising. Very interesting. Well, we told you, constant listeners, that that was a possibility, and now you've got some noted academics in finance telling you so as well. But when you shift to the math, it gets even worse for ESG investing products. I want to give you some of that math. Over the past 5 years, global ESG funds have underperformed the broader market by more than 250 basis points, and that is a significant spread. That's per year. So ESG had an annual average return of 6.3% over that time period, while the broader market had an average annual return of 8.9% over that time. And again, that's a huge performance gap. So To put that math into perspective, to put numbers to it, if you invested $10,000, 10 grand, in 2017, 5 years ago, into a global ESG fund, today you'd have about $13,500. But the same $10,000 in the broader market, you'd now, if you invested in the broader market index instead, you'd now have $15,250 today. So again, a very significant difference over a relatively short investment period of time. But you know who won in the ESG marketing campaign the past 5 years, don't you? It wasn't investors, but it was certainly the Wall Street firms that have offered the ESG funds up along with those outsized fees that go with those ESG funds. They've done quite well by selling you the overpriced products that oftentimes have underperformed. So there is certainly a good side to ESG investing, but there is also a bad side and an ugly side. And if you want to read more about the good, the bad, and the ugly of ESG investing, I'd refer you back to nickdeolius.com. The title of this sort of commentary is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of ESG. Again, you can find that under the Topics tab and under Commentary, and I think it's indexed under Business Finance. So give that a read if you haven't already. Yeah, sometimes a name can be great marketing, but it can also be very misleading, unfortunately. That brings us to the next topic, and it's the organization that is titled the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. I see that name, I see that title, and I immediately want to love this organization. Makes someone with a libertarian leaning like myself excited. And then I start to read more about this. I read the organization's mission, where it's talking about being an authoritative voice for fiscal responsibility. I read about their purpose, which they say is to improve the country's fiscal and economic condition. I'm reading more, and I'm seeing that the organization is referencing bipartisan leadership. I read all that, and I go from being excited to wanting to help fund this thing. I get really animated at that point. Well, unfortunately these days, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, it's anything but. The organization heartedly endorsed the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and its $500 billion of taxpayer waste. And the outfit had the audacity, and that's the best word that I can think of to describe this, to say that the Inflation Reduction Act, it was going to reduce healthcare costs and reduce energy costs. Are you kidding me? The organization also said the IRA was going to reduce the deficits that the nation and the government continues to propagate. The Inflation Reduction Act by the organization was called Just What the Doctor Ordered. I wonder what doctor they're talking about. Is it Dr. Kevorkian? I'm not sure. So the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, I think it has to change its name. Failure to do so, it's propagating a lie, or maybe its leadership should give a reread to its mission and stated goals and objectives because they seem to have forgotten them, and that is a shame. Okay, all this discussion and connections that deal with marketing in episode 73, it's got me thinking on our close here about marketing and rock music, because the two have always gone hand in hand. Since Elvis and the Beatles, the music industry has often accentuated the veneer and the marketing, sometimes even over the substance of the music. So think back, was it Elvis's voice or was it his look that got him fame? Was it the Beatles' chords or their haircuts that got them noticed initially? Probably, a little bit of both, I would suppose. And the most basic form of marketing in music, it's been the name of the act or group, of course. So hard rock bands in particular, they have a great history of focusing on the naming aspect of the band as a marketing tool. Names have been proven to sell. They sold records back in the day. They sold CDs back in the day. And by the way, back in the day for me is currently today because I still buy and listen to CDs all the time. They sold T-shirts, all kinds of merchandising, and so on. Just think of the iconic names in the hard rock genre. You've got Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Judas Priest, Metallica. Even groups named after the founders had a great marketing feel to them. An example of that, of course, is Van Halen. Van Halen was named not because just two members of the group had that last name, but their lead singer, who wasn't a Van Halen, looked at that name and said, that just sounds really good. That's a great name to market our group with, and thus the name of the band became Van Halen. And almost all of those bands that I mentioned in the hard rock grouping, they used the name as a marketing tool, and then they took it to the next level, whereby the name became what I will call being logalized. And what do I mean to logalize something? Well, you make it a logo. So for Van Halen, right, you had the VH with the wings that became its logo. With Metallica, the M and the A became sort of the lightning bolted script that they used, which sort of became its logo. So a few weeks ago, this all ties together because I appeared on the Energy Crew podcast that's hosted by JP Warren. You got to give that podcast a listen, Energy Crew. It's part of Digital Wildcatters. He did a great job, JP did, as a host, and I had a lot of fun on it. And I knew going into this that JP was a great marketer and a hard rock fan before I even spoke to him. And I could tell that at the get-go because he spelled crew and Energy Crew, the name of the podcast, not C-R-E-W, but C-R-U-E. And he used an umlaut, those two dots that you put over letters. He put that over the U in crew, in the C-R-U-E. So he did basically just what the band Motley Crue did with their name. It was C-R-U-E for crew, and they had the umlaut. And why did Motley Crue do that, by the way? Well, the band members at the time, they wanted the band to sound or feel more European or sophisticated on paper. So one day they're just sitting around and doing what Motley Crue did back in the day. They were sitting around drinking beer. The beer that they were drinking was Lowenbrau, which has an umlaut. And one of them looked at the bottle and said, why don't we put the umlaut over crew, over the U in crew? And thus, one of the great band names in the hard rock sort of genre became localized and helped with the merchandising and the advertising even more. But as I pointed out to JP at the end of the Energy Crew podcast, Motley Crue was not the first hard rock band to use the umlaut. The first was a personal favorite of mine, a personal hard rock band favorite, and that is Blue Oyster Cult, who put the umlaut over the O in oyster. Now, the best Blue Oyster Cult album, from my perspective, Secret Treaties. Check it out this week sometime and give it a listen. Career of Evil, that's the opening track. Great intro track, written, by the way, by Patti Smith. She was dating the drummer in Blue Oyster Cult at the time. We'll talk again in a week. Till then, take care.